has any objections to that, please let me know. It's really for research purposes and sharing. This is the sort of material that Dan will probably want to reference,
Yes.
and me at some time. So if anybody has any objections, just say, or you can turn your camera off if you want, or whatever.
Now, Dan, you contacted me because the experiment we did in the park in Tucson seemed to work out okay, and you got a lot of codes to work from, and you want to give a talk to the American Society of Dowsers.
Yes.
So that's okay. So, I mean, the thing is that if there's anything you need to know to build on that, just ask me now. And Don, because Don's done a lot of work with Geoffrey Crockford and Nigel
absolutely brilliant.
Wonderful.
And so, sorry to interrupt. I'll just keep doing this just to ask for details. So I just want to either Peter and/or yourself to describe what that experiment was in Tucson.
Right. Well, I offered to do one of my craft mind-to-mind requests to be set up an experiment. It can either be in the UK in a park, or in your case you wanted an area in Tucson, so you chose the area. So I then did a Google Earth map. I then mentally view that, and then I asked for the experiment to be conducted in that park, and I normally ask for 1800 hours on a certain day, and then to finish at 1800 hours, let's say in that case 7 days later. And then I report to you the dates and times, so that allows you to go out to that area and to examine it, see if you can find anything before, and to see the difference. When the time ticks to that 1800 hours, it should activate. But in the meantime, I gave you all the numbers, the strip codes for future time, past time, present time, and metals, life forms and other things, and you knew to set that against the colors that each number represented. So you painted up all the colors into the strips, basically because there was a whole page and a half of them, but I starred some of them so that they were the more important ones, and you were able to do that, and that you found that they actually worked. But we also found another event which we'd never experienced before. Hello, Don, are you there?
I'm still here. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
The phone took over the internet.
Yes, that you found that the thing was sensory bigger than you thought it was. So I had to go back literally to ET and say, is there a dimension within a dimension, something I'd never done? And they gave me the codes for that, the colors for it. I only get colors given to me. Then I convert them into the numbers and send them over to you, and that you found that the craft was much bigger than we originally thought. You also mentioned something about that you felt slightly unwell when you went in there.
Yes.
It was a health disturbance of some description in that area.
Yes.
The other thing also that came over from this experiment, that unbeknown to me, somebody else in Wales, the UK, was doing this and picked up the 7-day message that I hadn't got at the time, but you got, that it was to visit and examine humanity, plants and trees.
Yes, which was fascinating.
And they got the same message.
Yes.
So what's going on here? Because there's some communication going on here. I didn't get that message. You got it, and he got it in Wales, a person I've never ever had any contact with at all. But somebody called Chris Fry put me wise that he'd picked up this, so he passed the message on to you, I presume. So,
well, I actually worked independently and came up with that conclusion on my own, doing my own dimensional work and connecting with the non-humans, the artificial life forms that were associated with this experiment. And there were a lot of points that you mentioned that are very accurate and very significant for me. One of the things that I think was especially important was the time correlation was exactly when we went to 1800 hours GMT. In both locations, we both had a change in our dowsing, which indicated a change in the time.
If you stand in the energy circle, you'll find if you hold your rods across and they go, your rods will start to open up. And
yes,
vice
precisely.
versa, if they're open when you start and then they show, then your rods cross in that defined area. But you see, this is why Greenwich Mean Time was set up. In the UK, there is a meridian line that goes all the way from Greenwich, and it goes through East Grinstead and over the coast near Brighton, and it goes right round the world and comes back the other way. And it's about 6 foot thick, and that is an energy line, and that's what everything is defined about. So when the great meeting took place with all the nations who wanted to have time set worldwide as a monitor, it was set for Greenwich Mean Time because
yes.
But I mean, where it goes, it might go through Norway after here and through northern Russia or somewhere like that and come round somewhere else. I mean, I've never bothered to track it round. Don might know more about that.
Yeah.
I think it's completely random where it is. It just happened to be convenient, Peter.
Yeah.
It went through, I think it went through the Solar Observatory in Greenwich, and probably at a place where ships gathered so they could see the timing signals that came out of it. So every meridian goes around the Earth and through the poles and all that. There's nothing special about it that wasn't artificially made special.
Yeah, okay, right. So there we are. That's what they've defined the time band for, and then everybody else creates their time differences from it, you know. But however, one of the interesting things I wanted you to look at, I picked this up in a charity shop about a year ago, and I don't know if you can see this. This is a disc, a handheld disc from Latin America.
I just take it right up close so we can all have a very good look, and then Peter can.
And in the middle, you can see the face of God.
There we go.
And on the how can I put
do you want to hold it again?
Yeah.
Just a bit easier for you.
Around here, this bit here, you've got the 16 symbols around there. So each one of those symbols represents a color and a number. So that temple was doing exactly the same thing in Latin America. And that's why the moon temple in Chartres, the stones they picked up on the coast of the south of France, the 16 stones there, the 16 symbols we picked up in, actually in the Ionian Islands, that's what started this. The 16 symbols I struck, which also seem to be very similar to Masonic symbols as well, so I've probably honed in on the same one, and other things. You look for the 16 symbol alphabets, the very first temple alphabets, and you can distinguish a symbol when it keeps coming up as a separate symbol, and you know, it just so happens that must be the answer, because whatever answer is it is also that it, you know, UFO shaped, isn't it? It's just interesting.
Yes, very interesting.
And
you're
50 in a Heart Foundation shop.
Right.
And I don't know what it's made of. It's a sort of cement, volcanic cement, as far as I think.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just sitting there on the shelf, and I thought, can't miss this, because one other medallion that I did miss, and I sold it when I was working in a little shop, was a medallion from Jerusalem, where it had on the back the walls of Jerusalem, and on the other side it had the 3-pronged candle and the stem, and I realized there were 42 bricks on it, only bricks, and I realized down one side that represented the 16 symbols down there. And then I realized that there had to be other colors for the other 2 pillars that came to the base. So you had colors 1 to 10, then gold and silver for the base, and then the shank, pink, bronze, pale blue, and ochre. And so it was a great task with them to try and work out what colors should go in the order in the middle and at the other side. And it landed up that on the left-hand side, purple was 1 and black was 10. And on the other side, black was 1 and purple was 10. So it made a cross. The
And
X,
and
the
what's,
X,
and what's
the
the
X.
significance?
And that's those color patterns is something that you came up with, Peter?
No, I had to work it out with them because I've still got all the research papers over there on the shelf somewhere. But the thing is, there were colours going all over the place to try and see what design came out. And in the end, when you got the browns and yellows in each row together in the right position, it made the Star of David.
Tucson,
Yeah.
Arizona.
So
I mean, it's curious,
it
isn't
is.
it?
Everything
East
comes
of
out to what we know about history art forms.
Similar latitude, I think.
You know. Now the other thing, this is going to interest Don. Don, you've done a lot of work on the ancients and the mining and making cement and putting minerals into cement that shouldn't exist at the time that they were doing this mining.
According to current theories, anyway.
Now look, here we have a tusk. Look, it's fossilized, it stands perfectly. It has a smooth bottom, completely smooth, and it's shaped. It's probably the fossilized top of a mammoth tusk. And it's even been in the sea, you can see it's got all the bitings of animals that have gone into it.
Let's show it just a little bit. So, and of course, we know that Peter's not saying this fatuously. He's saying it because he's done the research on it and the testing.
It's got blood of the animal, the mammoth blood in it. That's the point, which is different from frog blood or lobster blood or bison blood or whatever it is. And here's another one. They were making them with smooth bottoms to them, so they stood up like bookends, you know. And that's another one. But this one,
Peter, can I just clarify that? You called it a tusk, and now you just said they were making them.
Well, no,
but it can't be fossilized tusk.
This is what I gave you your sample of. I've scraped it off.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, here we've got something that seems to be cement made to represent this and the bigger one.
Yeah.
So are you saying that this one is actually?
Well, it's an animal,
cast.
and it's been cut off as a tusk, has been kept as a souvenir, and then has been lost to time and fossilized in the sea.
So that is the tusk.
Yeah,
then.
that is the tusk, and that's a tusk as well,
Right.
and this is a replica,
right,
which they've made.
Okay.
And knowing that they were making things, and out of this so-called cement mix, we then have this situation here, which is a triangular craft. Basically, it's slightly worn there, and it's had a bit knocked off here. But when you go underneath, you can actually see the engine chutes here. There are 4 engines, and that one is slightly worn off. But if you have 2 of these, you've actually got the 2 triangles of the Jewish flag, Star of David again.
So
this is cement.
What testing?
Well,
were you
you've
doing
got
on that?
all sorts of metals in there, which I think you realised, Don, you know, from the research that we're making.
Well,
titanium.
I do have a theory.
Yeah.
I do have a theory about the source of the material, but I got to go back to this idea that you've got a fossilized tusk.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like a fossil to me, and you wouldn't know unless you cut it in half.
Well,
it looks like, I agree,
stone.
It looks a bit like tusk-like, but
it's turned to stone. That's the point. It's quite heavy.
Well, yeah, but you wouldn't know if it's a fossil until you cut it in half and saw the fossilization layers.
Yeah, but if it's a cast of a tusk as well, that it was buried there, and then it's decayed, and then the infills come in, and it's made it harder. So then when it lands up in the sea and it's being pushed around, it then drops out as a cast of what it was. But I can
I'm sure it's something. I'm sure it's something very interesting. But as far as fossils are concerned, you can always tell from the structure whether it's a fossil or not, and you couldn't tell just by looking at it.
No. But this here is a similar instance. But then you've got a hand in here. You've got the nail here, and they are about the size of my hand, squashed up.
Yeah.
And there's the little finger down there. So if I was to put my hand here, although this is supposed to represent female blood in there, human female blood, for the male one, I've got one here, which is the foot, and that is about the size of my toe with a toenail worn off on the end and the other toes around there. So what I want to know is,
well,
how long
it
does
may
take
interest
to stone
you.
that?
it may interest you to know that I've got a stone in the pond here that I found in a river in Devon, in Dartmoor, and Geoffrey analysed it as being a part of an original sculpture, which were of a large dinosaur or something of that sort. He could see the rest of it. Now, have you tried looking around it to see if there's any hologram left of the rest of the...
It's been banged quite a bit. I don't know if Dan realises, but most stones from the ancient times contain a picture of the surrounding, and because they were banged at the time and capture like a clicking a phone camera, whereas if you go and re-bang it, you get the current picture around there.
Which has some relationship to how homeopathic remedies work, I would imagine, where you percuss the remedy in order to activate the remedy in a different concentrations.
In Helios,
must be a relationship there.
This is true.
Interesting idea.
Well, if you take a stone, any little pebble or a large pebble, and hit it with a hammer, you will take a picture, holographic type of picture of the whole planet, I think, and perhaps the whole galaxy for all I know, but certainly all the surroundings.
That's interesting.
It picks everything up immediately. And what happens also is you take a picture of things that you weren't aware were there, like previous people that may have been existing in that place. So I think the stone is likely to record all history as well as the current surroundings or that when you hit it. So it's a pretty interesting thing, but you'll find, I mean, I've got lots of stones here that have images in them, and the images are often produced by catastrophic events like the one species of the space people trying to eliminate people like the Neanderthals, for example, which we believe they did. We don't think the Neanderthals disappeared of their own accord. We think they were exterminated by what we call the S-types. And there's quite a lot of evidence of that that I've seen. It's certainly something worth exploring. I don't know whether you can do it, but you will have in Arizona a lot of evidence of previous history, I'm absolutely certain. In the high desert in California, there's I've been many times, there's huge amount of evidence of previous occupation.
You know, let me mention just very briefly regarding Neanderthals and the elimination of them. There's some genetic research that was done last year relative to the COVID-19 virus. One of the discoveries that was made by an independent genetics lab I believe in Europe or in Eastern Europe, former Soviet bloc Europe, the genetic research pointed to markers that indicated a particular affinity for the virus to affect individuals with Neanderthal genetic information. So it was specifically targeting, it seems, individuals that still retained a certain amount of genetic information from Neanderthals. In other words, at some level, the virus was focused at eliminating specifically those individuals from the population.
That's interesting.
Yes.
Television program yesterday.
I can send you a link to the article if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Yes, please. I'd be very happy with that.
Yeah.
Spanish flu, I thought, started after the end of the First World War, but in actual fact, it started during the last year of the First World War, and it was kept quiet. But it was called the Spanish flu because they were sort of out of one side or the other, were neutral, and they called it Spanish flu. In actual fact, it was rife in Germany at the end or during the last months of the First World War, and it makes one think that we never had a virus like that other than the plague doing this. That this may have been a bacteriological weapon developing the cold virus up, the influenza virus up, into something that would weigh the troops down to allow an army to march in, and got out of hand. And it killed over 50 million people. the thing is this, that isn't it interesting that they're blaming the same thing on laboratories in China for creating a bacteriological weapon based on what is a coronavirus, which is regarded as the cold virus, which is the pneumonia and the flu and all that sort of thing, influenza.
Yeah.
And Joanne was saying that she had a report resulting from one of her programs during the Falklands War. A submarine docked in one of the Falkland Islands. Was it the island of Thor? Thor. And an SAS man acknowledged officials getting off that submarine and digging up sailors, bodies of sailors who died of the Spanish flu, but they were preserved in permafrost and removing material back into the submarine.
Yeah. What had happened was it's very interesting. I'd interviewed a guy back in 2012, and he did a piece on the Falkland Islands, and he showed a photograph, one of the very few photographs of some of our guys in snow, snow gear. Yeah. And I had a call then from a guy who said my dad was in that photograph. Now, he didn't want to give his dad's name, and his dad did not want to speak to me, but he did. And he said, what I want to tell you is basically what Peter had said, that they had observed this submarine arrive with two very high-ranking military medical brass on it, and that is what they did. Who knows about that? I mean, you can call it hearsay, but, somebody went to the trouble of calling me in 2013. They made that call, and just to tell me that their dad had said what he did. So it's just curious.
That's interesting. Thank you so much for that. I don't want to completely derail our discussion here about those artifacts with viruses, but I do want to ask a question while we still have that topical. The artifacts that you have, Peter, and Don, I don't know if you've examined some of those. I'm curious as to whether they were cast, whether they were shaped, what their composition was, and what can you tell me about them?
If something is cast, I don't know how, you can actually see the nail on that. How would that...
Would that be carved then instead of cast?
A riverbed, rotted into a riverbed, let's say, and turned to stone, and then found its way into the interests of an ancient who's cut it out, basically, put it in his temple, and then the temple has collapsed into the sea over thousands of years as the sea levels rise, and then landed up, or millions of years, we just don't know, and landed up, being washed about, and then lands up on the shore. You see, this also washed up at the same time, and that is, there's no doubt about it, it's a bone.
Yeah.
And it's the same material, it's cast, solid. Now, that could be a cast of something that was made and then it's dropped out. But I actually have rib as well, and I've actually got a little hip of a baby's bone, the ball and socket that goes in to the pelvis. And anyway, some years ago, I took a piece of rib up to the hospital where my wife worked, and I said, what, can you tell me what this is? He said, this is rib. He says, you can actually see the joints of the muscle where it actually joined on to the bone there. And he said, but I'd like to know how big the person was, he said, because that rib is absolutely enormous in comparison to the ribs that we've got.
Yes. So, okay. Very interesting.
Are we talking about giants? And look, we've heard about pudding stone, but what about this? You can see the eyes in the front. You can see the gull wing at the back here. Again, that side's got worn always on that side. So I maintain that if I'm the wall, it was stuck into the wall like that, so you could silhouette the craft like that. And then when you look at it headways on, you've got the cabin here with the two eyes, which they represent as a god, because they didn't understand the concept of a flying craft, the technology, but they thought it was an animal. You know what I mean? So, and you can see the mixtures that they put in here, which has got distorted as the sound part wears out quicker than the other bits. And that's what we call pudding stone. Is that not right, Don? They put stones in and urine and blood in and anything they could find representative.
I could mention something about pudding stone,
Yeah.
which is perhaps relevant to your artifacts as well. And it is that, just winding back a bit, I don't know if you remember Comet ISOM.
Yes.
Or Comet Enk. They were both, we detected both of them, and we took pictures and we built them up. We brought them down in the garden and magnified them so that we could observe what was happening to them. They actually were being converted into weapons platforms by their little half-round sort of carvings out of the sides of them, so that they could mount a slewing type of weapon, like probably a laser, I guess. I think it was a laser. Now, during that process, which was very rapid, a lot of dust was produced, and this dust was actually harvested after it had been separated into useful materials and rather less useful materials. So they, in a comet, they would extract all of the gold, silver, iridium and copper and so on, and consider that useful. And they would also discard the granite dust and iron, as a matter of fact. They don't use iron. But they didn't throw it into space, because I think that probably would be inconvenient for various reasons. They actually put it into a silo. Now, that dust could be what pudding stone is made of. Pudding stone as a mortar, as a matrix with very hard quartz or flint pebbles in it. And this is what they call Hertfordshire pudding stone. The geologists believe that it's a natural thing, but they have no idea where it comes from. We believe it's just concrete made by the space people, and probably by the Druids as well. And when you analyze the matrix of that, you come up with masses of responses to all the precious metals and the unusual metals. And the dust you gave me, Peter, responds to everything I've tried so far.
What did you get off of that?
Yeah, I mean, I've got most of the interesting metals, including iridium, platinum, palladium, and all those sort of metals.
Just in that piece of stone that was shaped like a tusk top that sits firmly on.
So it's almost certainly a moulding or a casting.
Yeah.
I don't really think it's likely to be a fossilization.
Oh, no, that isn't. No. But the others are totally different from that, made of different material, and they pivot.
They look
like
very
bone,
similar,
like rotted bone. If you look at this, you know what happens. You've got a bit of whale bone. You get all these pits in there where the animals have started to eat out the calcium in the bone. You see, so it gets eaten away. Now, here's an example of a figure. The figure sits perfectly with a bit of blue tack on there. And you've got a face there and a headdress, and you've got an arm down here, and an arm there, and a hand on the lap.
Let's just show it so everybody can see it. Out of time, it says. Hang on, folks.
Just going to upgrade.
If the zoom goes down, we want to continue. I've gone. There we go. So
it does look
made
pretty
out of the same stone.
So anyway, so that just gives you a good. Maybe a better look at it.
Do you think it could be a votive offering piece?
Something like that, yeah. But they all come up on this same 20 to 30 foot length of washer. Every single thing here on this desk. No, I've never had to go further out. If I was to go in another year's time, you'd see more stuff because it gets sucked back and it gets thrown back again. Something that's washed up then might get sucked back and not show for another 10 years.
Is this local or Adriatic?
I'm going to say Adriatic. But we find it in Weymouth as well, on the wash up on the beach there. I found a devotive head, which I put on the Rock Art Museum. I don't know if you know about that, Dan, the Rock Art Museum.
No, I don't.
Well, they put on people's finds. They're finding that these rocks and things have all got faces on them. And I've got a website, well, some pages on there, which I can give you my password to get in, and all the photographs of the samples that I've loaded up, you know, animals and things like that have been put on there, and you can see everybody else's. They've got about 140 or more pages of people's findings all over the world that they've been putting in, found on beaches.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, let me suggest one thing that you can do with those artifacts that's non-destructive. And I've seen this approach in the past. You can actually take the object and measure amount of water in a container and measure how much the object displaces, and then measure the weight of the object to get the density. And then from that density, you can determine what the relationship is between that material that that object is made from and other materials such as standard stones and other substances such as a concrete. And it's non-destructive. It's just, you know, those objects came from a waterborne environment, so submersing them in water shouldn't cause a problem.
Whilst those are a bit difficult, apart from that, to see that it is a bone.
Yes,
the top of a bone.
It's pretty obvious. Yes, you don't find that in nature as a stone.
Some of the things that they've been making, like frogs and mammoths, where you've actually got the trunk coming down and the four legs, and in this particular area, they make their animals rather stylized, like the Eskimos do in northern Canada, where they put a stylized pair of legs in the front and one leg at the back, you know. Very strange. And I should imagine the bone was stuck in for the tusks, or some wood was stuck in for the tusks, and it's just rotted away, but you're left then with the trunk, you know. And then the whole thing starts to get shaped by the sea, you know, slightly distorted, like this is, you know, bumps and things like that appear over time. And the question is, the history people are walking over, and they don't know, they're just thinking they're walking over pebbles on the beach or stones on the beach.
Well, you know, it's really important, I think, to recognize the use of dowsing and some of the non-physical abilities that we've touched on here is very important in identifying those objects, and it goes beyond what conventional science can do to identify them. You know, one of the questions I have is in both yourself and Don's mind here, with what we've talked about, the connection to extraterrestrials currently. What do you see as the connection between maybe that connection to extraterrestrials currently and the extraterrestrials that may have been involved in some of those objects? Or is there a connection between the past and the present in that regard?
Did you get that chart I sent to you?
Yes, I did.
Easiest guide to space and time. Yeah, well, I sent it to everybody, including the Egyptian cultural department as well.
Yes.
But the problem is, I wanted to try and show how, as we traverse the sun, everything is recorded in time, rather like a recording. So therefore, you know, you can go back in time. You've clicked off, haven't you? You go back in time, and you've got present time, but I measured present time as just being 1/4 of a second.
I'm on a Zoom conference at the moment.
The past. But there is a future, because I think we've been dumped in a particular time zone in the history of the Earth and the solar system. So therefore we think of the future and imagine the future and see things in the future sometimes that happen, premonitions. But everything lands up in the past because we're expanding the way the space is. And that is why I've put the maths in that paper that actually comes out to some very interesting figures. But each of those four sections represents 1 second in time.
Let me ask, would you mind muting Don's thing until he gets back? Because it's difficult for me to understand what Peter's saying with his audio coming in. Just mute him. There we go. Now.
So the sheet shows a lot of squares, and each square has 15 on it, and 15 is the color for time. So if you take 4 15s, I think it comes to 60, doesn't it? So that's 60 parts.
45, actually. Yes.
45, yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah, 40, no, 15s, 4 15s.
4 15s is 60.
60, yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yes.
For time, pale blue. And that each one of those is a quarter of 1 second, right? So isn't it interesting that, 1/25th of a second, you've got a camera setting 1/25th of a second on the standard camera.
That's true.
That basically it's recording a moment in time. You take a photograph there, it's caught, right? But you've got it all the way for the future.
Yes.
Past, basically, and for the future. But you've recorded the past, you've got it in the future, haven't you? Because it's going to be there tomorrow.
So the chart and the technique that you mentioned relative to the understanding of the nature of time, does that give you a mechanism for connecting and communicating between these different realms?
Yeah, to a young lady that was found dead or dying on the common in our town. And nobody knew where she'd been. So we had a code for her as deceased or for living. You just remove black and yellow if they're alive against the photograph, which was well published. So Joanna and I went to the common with the past time code, and we picked up her energy in the past on the common where she was last seen, and we then walked the walk that she did, and the rod just flew round, and we followed it to viewing points over the common, which were high points. And as she was a photographer, basically they looked to me like visual points, either for searching for something or observing photographic items of interest. Because what was interesting, she was seen wearing a yellow coat when observed, and then later on she was seen with a lining as inside green. So she wanted to sort of blend into the common trees and plants and things. So on these high points, we then went from somewhere called Wellington Rocks, where it was stood on the top and viewed, went round to the cricket ground, and it interacted with a vehicle because the rod pointed to a vehicle. We had to veer off the track to the side of where a vehicle would have been parked, as a car park.
Is that a car park?
Yeah. And then it then went away from that and then through a footpath to another high point, and then came back off that high point along a track across the Major Yorks Road and into something called Hungershaw Park. And then we followed it along Hungershaw Park to another area, which we won't go into. But I wanted to know about that area that actually, let's put it this way, why she would have gone there. And the Google Earth map showed there was a response to a particular drug we're going to call A. So we knew that that drug, which we actually had a code for, responded in that area. So when the autopsy took place and the initial report, nothing was said about that except that there was a beta blockers, which was a medicated prescription.
Sure, for heart medication.
Medicated prescription for anxiety. And it was only when the coroner gave the final verdict that he brought in that there was also substance A found there. So we picked up substance A by going back in time against the past code, against also the photograph, and the coroner.
I was just.
I got it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Yeah. So
thank
the
you.
coroner's report said that drug A was in the blood, but was never made public before the final verdict. And that we picked up on the future time. So if you might like to do an experiment by going back with past time code to the site of the UFO experiment to see if you can reenact it again in time.
Okay.
That'd be quite
That's a really good idea.
Yeah, so you need the UFO code, and you need to say, I need to go back in time to this date and this time. And you knew that you did it.
Interesting.
And see if you can do the same as we did with the deceased person.
And it was, I was there every step of the way. We did that field trip. Yeah. And I have to say, I haven't experienced that before. and I was, kind of holding my camera, and we've got this. We will do a section on this, an episode of this lady's demise and our work with it. It was astonishing to see, and I also experienced it. I couldn't quite experience it so much because I was holding the camera stuff, and
it's on film.
It is, but it's exactly as Peter said. We literally were just wherever they crossed, we crossed. Wherever they went, we went.
What is strange, when the Rod sensed that she had actually talked to somebody in a car, another car drew into that car park, and the guy got out and went into the booth. Said, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "Dowsing." So he said, "We're dowsing this deceased ladies." I don't want to give the thing over.
Sure.
We might use this elsewhere. And he said, "I know one of the experts that's examining that case. They're completely confused because they don't know where she went or what happened." And the mother said that when the body was found, that her glasses were missing, and she couldn't see without her glasses. And when I mentioned this to one of the police officers who I know around the town, he said, "Oh, well, the animal probably took it or something." But that's ridiculous. Dogs, cats don't take glasses. I mean, we don't have monkeys in Tunbridge Wells, So, and I don't think a magpie would take it because it's a pair of glasses. So, I mean, it's completely ridiculous, and then you say about substance A and they turn around and say, "Oh, the place is rife of it,
I know, there's always an excuse, isn't there?
There's always an excuse not to do a complete job. I mean, all I can tell you is this: Agatha Christie and Poirot would do a much more thorough job. But the trouble is, they weren't charging anybody for it.
Right.
That's the point.
Yes, I understand.
This is the same with a lot of things. If you take this recent case, the Everard case, that's been in the media, the young girl who was accosted by a policeman in a car. Well, in the UK, we actually followed that all the way through and reported it, that she was picked up by a middle-aged white individual in a car from a possible bus stop, waiting for a bus to go to the station, and she wanted to catch a train because she didn't want to walk over the common, was accosted in that car. And we followed it all the way down into Kent. And basically, the story then unfolds the way they wanted to unfold. But we feel there's a completely different story attached to this. Completely different story. Because when the remains were found, they were badly burnt, and they had to have a specialist who could identify dental records to identify the remains of the person. Well, you can't tell whether any organs are being removed from that body before it was burnt. That's the point. So you cannot just draw a conclusion. You have to look at other aspects. So you come to people such as yourself and other people who have these expert things that can give you an alternative meaning to an event.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate thing, and especially if in any way a policing official is involved in a case like that, which may or may not be the situation. On a personal note, I had a friend of mine who was working doing software analysis and software work for a university that had a contract with the police entity in the city of New Orleans in Louisiana. And he was called down one day to work on the scanner because they were using a scanner to scan images. At the time, they still had a lot of photographs that were done on film, and they were using a scanner. They couldn't get the scanner to work. So he went down to this office, and he walks in the office, and it was like the walls were completely covered with all of these horrific photographs from murder scenes that had happened in New Orleans. And in the course of his conversation, he determined that it was an internal investigation program they were doing, and they thought it was a policeman that was doing the mass murders in New Orleans. This was back in the 90s, and they were keeping it very quiet. So I don't know what happened to that, but so it is possible. Yeah.
But we know from another case that I won't go into that it was found to be a possible political problem. So therefore, it was just clamped down on straight away. And
Right.
so the case remains really unsatisfactorily unanswered, but they damn well know what's happened.
Well, the interesting thing about this is the kind of understanding that you and I get through the dowsing techniques and other techniques goes beyond this. And it does make us, in some regards, a bit of a concern, susceptible to outside influences that are not to our benefit.
No, quite. Yeah, quite.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but the aliens are safer.
Yes, they seem to be. Yes, they do.
Even though they might pass on the odd virus.
Yes, and
from that charts that I used to do over the world map, 3 times a year I used the agreed dates that they would be over whatever countries they were going over. China, it used to be North America, South America, China, Russia, Great Britain and Australia as the main key areas where they started to drift around. But they would lay out their little spheres, 5 at a time, in a particular pattern that you could join up and make one of the 16 symbols that were pre-agreed. And then you could spell a message, a word out. And what was interesting, they spelt out this word virus and our code Y, and they gave us the code for the virus as well, which adds to 45, which links to Orion. And so they knew about the virus. And what is interesting, who named the virus that very month, and at about the same start date, I think it was the 11th of February, the same start date that I started my program, who so named that virus. I also believe that the Indians, the Delta variation, have named their virus in a mathematical code as 42.
Interesting.
Yeah, and ours added up to 45. So all these numbers are interacting, telling you that this virus, either they know about it and trying to tell us about it, or that they have something to do with it.
I have to show you this book as well, because
right.
I haven't finished reading it yet. I keep dipping
in
and out of it.
Yeah. You see that?
You may just as we're speaking about the alien potential input.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you very much, Nick Redfern and Robert Wood. Yes. I was very fortunate to meet Robert Wood a number of years ago. So.
Yeah. I mean, the whole universe is full of viruses. I mean, Don will tell you about viruses. Don?
I don't know much about it, to be honest.
I thought you said everything was actually full of it all over the place. If you look at the human body, we're full of viruses, right?
Well, most likely, I suppose we are.
Yeah. Have you any input into this discussion?
Useful, but I know you know more about viruses. I know very little.
Yeah. Have you?
Nigel is probably the one. He's a bio.
Do you remember that experiment you did in your grounds several years ago, before Jeff sadly passed on, where he wanted to interact with some forms? Professor.
We've done a lot of that.
Yeah, Professor this and Professor that. And I secretly set up an experiment to coincide with that over your grounds. And then on the month, because this was a weekend, and on Monday, I rang, I don't know whether I spoke to you or whether it was Nigel, but I said, how did the experiment go? And he said, well, it's extremely strange. He said, but we started the meeting, and then all of a sudden, attention was drawn to some enormous entity in the air, which was unexpected. And Nigel, I believe, as far as I can remember, got in a car with somebody else and drove somewhere away to try and get a bead on the angle of this thing.
We did. Do you remember, Don? I came with you actually on that. We went to this park.
Yeah, and got a bead on this. And these forms that you were interacting with said, oh, that comes from about 10,000 light years away, and they are about the most intelligent of all the species.
Weren't they the aquatics?
Yeah, it's something to do with some form that Geoffrey.
I seem to remember that, and I seem to remember that these beings up in the air, the reason they were up in the air was they were in liquid, they were in water,
Yeah.
The aquatics traveled inside their spacecraft fully in water.
Yeah.
And when they were in their space suits out of their spacecraft, their suits were full of water as well. That was quite interesting, but there was an enormous war between our federation and the adjacent federation, which we call the Empire, which was the Empire of the Aquatics. Luckily, our federation won. Nigel and I and Margaret as well helped them quite a bit, because interestingly, the space people don't have the same sensitivities to dowsing, for example, that we have. So they were unable to see the alien spacecraft and the mines and etc. that were strewn around space, but we could see them very easily. So we just identified them for them.
Don, weren't they cloaked from the Federation's view?
Yes, they were cloaked, but we could see through the cloaking. The cloaking was double aluminium, and if you do the experiment, it's quite a straightforward one. If you get 2 aluminium plates, and you must vary the distance in them by experiment, put a source of field behind the plates, for example, a quartz crystal. You can douse the quartz crystal most of the time, but when you get the spacing of the aluminium plates exactly right, you can't any longer see the field. So that's part of the cloaking thing. I don't think our scientists are really aware of that. One day they may be. They tend to concentrate on metamaterials for cloaking and for this sort of.
Well, that's interesting that a lot of the material analysis of from the few samples that have been available of craft say that they're aluminum. The outsider shell is aluminum. So that's very interesting. And I don't know if you recall in Star Trek V, the engineer wanted to create something called transparent aluminum, which I'd never heard of before, and that showed up somehow in that film.
I stuck at 1. I never saw any more Star Wars. I saw the first one when I was
Star Trek.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Okay. No, I haven't seen much of that.
And it's interesting, in that particular movie, they were doing work relative to the whales, and the whales as a non-human presence coming into the solar system and having an interaction with whales on the Earth. And that was part of the whole story. So there was some information that was coming through, I think, in that story.
Have you read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Yes.
Unfortunately, yes.
I think the answer to life and everything is 42, isn't it?
Yes.
I think a pot of petunias as well was involved.
Yes.
Yeah, but
yes. Oh no, not again. Yes.
This 42 is rather interesting, you see, because Douglas Adams struck this. But how I got involved with this is that our dear friend Alan Hayday discovered this, what we call an arrow-shaped burial of 126, 27 feet males in an arrow shape with a pit on the right-hand side with material in it. And he was showing me how to use the mega disc or the Rosetta disc with the colors, which I'd never done before. So after he'd finished doing the work on this, I thought, well, why on earth would anybody want to lay this out thousands and thousands of years ago? What were they trying to tell you? It was obviously a message, because it's an arrow, it's pointing, way out, arrow, that direction, arrow, So I thought, well, how can I do this through color? Because he says you can go over maps with color. So the first thing I got was white for something spiritual they'd witnessed, God or something like that. So everything in a church goes against white. So I thought, right, what is the most valuable thing they might have? And gold, I would have put down as gold. So I had white and gold. And I thought, well, if it was something from space, then it would be more radioactive than we know down here. So how do I determine a color for radioactivity? So I went all over the house, and the only thing I could find was an alarm clock with a luminous dial. And I found orange responded to that. So I had orange, white and gold. I painted that up, and then I held it and went over the map, and bingo, the other side of the valley responded. So I telephoned Alan, who came down the following Wednesday, and we went to the area. He said, "You have found something." But in the meantime, I had a good idea what it was because he knew what it was. And I thought, well, I'll home in on this. So I homed in on it and I said, "Is there such a thing as alien life?" And I got a response. So can you give me the colors to detect this? And I was given these 5 colors. And you know, after I held these colors to try and detect where alien life was, I had the map of the Earth laid out on a table, and I went over holding this color code with a pendulum, and I went over and about 18 inches up, 12 to 18 inches up, I got a response. And it drew away, it went up. So I stood on the chair, picked it up again, and it went higher. So I stood on the table, and I picked it up again, and it went higher. And I hadn't got a ladder, so I couldn't go any higher. And I did this several times, and in the end, it wouldn't move. So I said, "Have we made contact?" And it spun. Yes. So that code at that time responded to alien life on a map over the Pacific somewhere, high up, thousands of miles up into space, but enough to pick it up through our sensory system. And it wasn't until about a year after that that we realized that all these colors had power values, because you have to ask them for the knowledge you want. And if they're willing to give it to you, so if you don't know to ask, you don't get the information.
So I have a question for you about that. When you're asking for the information with the use of the colors and the numbers, that gives you one matrix of information, but then you relate that to specific things.
So
when you're getting that communication,
yes or no. It's a yes or no. It's not a whole conversation, if you know what I mean. It's a yes or no to what you're asking. So you ask for the colors for something by holding the 42 code. You ask for the colors, and say if you want the colors for gold, it says yellow and green. So you then
and you're going down all the colors. What's the process used? Going down all the colors?
It comes into your mind, and
I see.
Colors,
okay.
And then you write the notes down, and then if it's a multiple thing, there's 7 or 8 colors in it. You write them all down, and then you give them their number value at the side, and you can do a number strip. Because the number strip you read left to right, which you can only really do one at a time. The colors, you can hold a multiple of colors like my fingers and just hold them in the hand like a game of cards, and the mind will read the whole lot and give you a much, much stronger response. A much, much stronger response. But if you put a wrong one in there, it kills the whole lot. And that's your double check.
Okay. That connection that you have where you get the information, can you talk a little bit about how that can come about for you? Because in teaching this to individuals, in the absence of giving them, gold, uranium, platinum, aluminum, future time, present time, and giving them the codes and the colors to go with that, how can they derive, what is necessary to derive your own codes?
We activated a Pandora's box inside by the first code we homed in on.
So I think what Dan means is, can you share, can somebody else do that?
Yes, because basically once you've got the colors, other people can use the same colors. I think Don said, if I try and do the colors myself, they peter out after a short time. He said, but if I ask you to get the colors, and I ask 42 for the colors, and then he has the colors, that code is set for all time.
I see. So there's a connection to the numbers and setting the codes for particular things.
Setting up mind-to-mind communication with another form that's giving you the information you want to know in color that you then put into the numbers. Relative to
see. And what do you think is the significant? You've talked a little bit about the 16 and the 18 different letters and numbers and colors. What do you think is significant of that number in terms of, the combinations adding up to 40, 42?
We've landed up with both here in America with a 26-letter alphabet, haven't we? But
yes.
If you have the 16 symbol temple code and add them together, you've got 42 symbols, haven't you? And that happened because the Romans, I believe, knew all about this. So they knocked out the symbols for numbers and put them into the alphabet, and then gave us Roman numerals, numbers 1 to 10 and so on, you know.
I see.
Yeah,
Interesting.
because in numbers, I think if I'm correct, my symbol for 10 was a W with a line through it. But in the 16 temple code, we don't have a W. And that's the same as the ancient Jewish, well, I'm not Jewish, by the way, but the ancient Jewish alphabet.
Hebrew.
Yeah, Hebrew. It basically had the symbols with the 9 or 10 things missing that we've got.
Right, I see.
Told me about, yeah. So it does to me look as if some of the symbols were used in the shapes for numbers. For instance, I have T for 8, but J, where T is, was the letter for number 8. So basically, they've used these sounds for numbers into the 16-letter alphabet and made 26 letters. But other nations have added more letters in for different sounds.
Sure.
Yeah, so basically, it is interesting that all these temples just had 16 symbols. And, and it does relate to the computer code on the craft, because my finding is that they have 3 rows of 5 colors, where the shades are in those 1 to 15 at the bottom row, like green silver mix, on a gold base, creating your 16 system. And that to me looks like the same computers that the high priests were wearing, but with precious stones.
The jeweled breastplates.
The jeweled breastplates that they were wearing.
Yes.
Communications in when they were escorting a famous work of art or communications. You know what I mean?
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So in other words, the colours somehow responded to them through the precious stones. So it'd be interesting to know whether those like ruby, sapphire, and gold and things like that, and when all put together, can be used the same way as direct colour can be. But what I found is that if you want the code for 42 off their computer, you can get to 42 using the same colours, but you have one shade gives you 3 more in numbers, and one colour gives you 3 less in numbers, so you still land up at 42.
Okay.
So their computer, although it's made up of 15 blocks of colour, is doing the same into our mind as we're using 42 blocks of colour on the 3D, because basically it's 16 down this side, but the middle allows you 3D sensory system. So you've got para both sides, eyes, ears, hands, legs, you know.
Okay.
And the dia is down the middle, the all-seeing eye. So that's your 3 dimensions.
I see. Okay, that makes very good sense.
Yeah. So basically, their computer, our computer's 42 blocks of 1 to 12 in 3 rows, where silver and gold are the same values, 11 and 12 in all 3 rows, but the colours 1 to 10 are in different orders, so that the mind is working in 3D. And I think that's how we see in 3D in depth, and how we get the imagination of depth as well. Because if we didn't have that, I think we'd see flat.
Yes, that's interesting. And it blocks us if we don't have that. You know, I wanted to share with you, this was something that it reminds me a little bit of some of the information layout that you've described. And I had a gentleman a number of years ago who was also a dowser, who had taught me that the subconscious sees everything in reverse, and the superconsciousness sees everything in reverse and upside down. And so you can actually take a book. This is a book I'm reading, The Tibetan Art of Parenting, which is interesting. And you can turn it upside down, turn it over, look at the book backwards from the back forward, just almost subconsciously here by going through it. And then you can ask a question. And I found where when I thumb through the book, I will land on the appropriate page that's the answer to my question. And I've done this with volumes, hundreds and hundreds of pages, and gone right to the information I needed. And I shortcuts reading books, actually. So, which is a benefit these days, given the number of books that we have. Yes,
we don't understand, but I do know that Mr. President Biden actually manages to get the Pentagon to release as to whether we're alone or not from these photographs, which I believe was supposed to come out. The report was supposed to come out yesterday, I think.
Well, let's hope so.
Yeah, because basically what we've discovered and what we've been discussing, if they know about this, they kept it pretty quiet. But although we know that certain sections use this, but what is interesting, I can go into Christchurch Priory in Dorset, and you go into this church, and you've got 42 arches, the original arches, big arch with 2 small arches on the top in the nave, both sides add up to 42. You then look on the right-hand side, and you've got 24 arches with seats in them, and that's where the priors, because it's a priory, the priors used to sit. Call them monks if you like, used to sit, but there were 24, and that is the priory of Sion, I suppose you want to call it, church.
Interesting.
So it's and I just been to St. Peter's Church in Dorchester, next to Dorchester Museum, and I went up, I looked for the secret codes in churches, and I looked at the nave, the transept going up to the altar, and there are 2 pillars. Now, you build a building in exact sort of mathematics, you know, is particularly in church times, then you've got 2 sets of choir stalls each side. But I looked at the floor, and there's a little pattern on the floor, and it had 9 tiles that side and 14 the other side. So it's 5 tiles out, but the tiles were all the same size, and that was deliberately done because they're mathematical. 9 is the all-seeing number of the step pyramid, and 14 is creation. And bronze, bronze. But they got it into the design that you wouldn't notice that the floor design was out in relation to the choir stalls, but it looked all right, you know. And it's the same behind Canterbury Cathedral's high altar. You've got the way the universe is designed in tiles, in showing you 5 sections, all in different forms.
Interesting. You know, let me share this with you. This is something that you may find very interesting. It goes onto the side of science, looking at some of the things that we do. A while back, I came across an article, a scientific article published internationally that's available. I can actually send you the link to it. But it talks about something called gamma brass. And brass is a fairly old material that's been around for quite a long time. And brass is made up of a number of different elements, all fused together to form that particular material that we call brass. Well, there's something called gamma brass, which has a certain percentage of each type of material. As it turns out, when those different materials come together and they form a matrix that the gamma brass is composed of, when we use and experience gamma brass in our world, that pattern of those crystals forms something that would be akin to a tesseract. It's a multi-dimensional projection into three-dimensional space from a non-physical space. And so the mathematics of how the materials come together in brass relates to the non-physical in terms of, or other dimensions in terms of patterns and geometry. So science is beginning to show and have some pieces that explain some of the connections of these materials to our world.
That would be great. So
we're running out of time,
guys. We've got 2 minutes here, so we can
just finish up.
Okay, good. And that's 2 articles I'll send you, Joanna. And I would like this recording too.
I'll send those out to.
But it's been a very interesting discussion, this, because we've learned things in different ways that we haven't gone involved. I mean, I don't get too involved in this because I actually look for things that I need to look for, you know. But I mean, going into deep space, you can follow a craft across the universe where it comes from by working on maps. If you got the star chart, the great big star chart that gave you the original stars, you know, within the circle with Orion right up the top, you'll find that this craft will get to the edge of the map, and then it will start to reflect back. And then it will go through the edge of the paper into an area off your map.
Interesting.
That is going into the next section of the universe through what we call a black hole or a wormhole. But it's not a wormhole like a black hole. It's connecting one section of the universe to the other section, for which all matter is transferring from that section into our section, which we call the Milky Way.
I think
that's where the entrance is.
I think Don's done a lot of work on that with Nigel and Jeff, particularly following craft. I mean, I always remember when I first went to see Jeff, and he'd got the solar system laid out in his back garden, and this is sort of real time, absolutely in perspective, if you like, using a technique to draw down the bodies and to show that holographically, and he was showing the craft, on the edges of the solar system and following their trajectory out beyond. It was absolutely mind-blowing.
The thing is that when our section of the universe fills up, it will create another bang, but it's not a bang as we understand it. It'll just link suddenly with the next section and blow a hole through it. And then all our matter will then drift through into that as the next extension.
Yes, interesting.
Yeah, but there are 5 sections, so it'll either go into one of the remaining 3 sections around that area, depending on which direction it'll go. But we're all moving away from each other. But the mere fact that each section of the universe is magnetically different from the other, it's creating the energy of a 5-pole motor, which I believe is electricity, which they call dark matter, which keeps the whole matrix of the universe electrified, basically.
You know, I really have to say, Joanna, that's one of my goals in life, is to be able to walk in somebody's front yard and discover a map of the solar system and the alien presence that it foretells. That's quite a...
It's amazing. I mean, I've done loads of field trips with the guys.
Don't you do that? It's very straightforward to do it.
Yes, I'm actually planning to do that. I haven't done it yet, but creating on that scale sounds like it's fascinating to me.
I can give you some. Well, I can't really now, but because Peter has so much information for you that
yes,
I hesitate to interrupt.
But I'd love to talk to you, Don, about that. Yes.
Yeah, I'll send you an email. So
please do.
It's very easy to do and very rewarding. And the first time I saw it, when Nigel put it down in the garden for me, the solar system, he said, have a look behind the sun. And there's the most enormous response from a space station behind the sun. And it's not the only one, there are many. So it's very interesting to do it. You learn a lot.
Very good. Well, I'm looking forward to talking to you about that, because that is definitely in my future.
Well, you've got a lot there to discuss with the American Society of Dowsers, and I hope there's nothing on this. These two. You
have to be careful what you tell them.
Yes, I know.
That is against our benefits from having viewed by third parties, because I think it broadens the mind, you know.
Yes,
The big snag is it's totally bonkers.
Yes, precisely why the mainstream stays away from it, I think.
That's one reason for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
The other reason is they don't know how to do it. But...
Well, I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and sign off early. We've got 5 minutes, but I'll go ahead and sign off early because... yes.
And go back to see if you can recreate that experiment again from the past into the present.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you so much for that suggestion, Peter. It has been wonderful to talk to all 3 of you.
Send us some sort of details about this talk you're going to give.
Absolutely. Yes. I have one scheduled to do in the fall, so I'm going to be doing some planning for that and incorporate some of the things we've discussed.
And when you go to the Philippines, will you be looking for the Japanese gold?
I'm no comment.
Because
I must leave as well, because there's things to do. So can I say cheerio to everybody?
Okay.
And
yes.
Thank you for being here. Lovely to see you.
Okay.
Hope we can speak.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, guys. So I think we maybe have 4 minutes left. So so it's just us. Okay,
Yeah,
we've
right,
gone.
okay.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. This was the ET Newsroom with Peter, myself, Joanne Summerscales, Don Hocking, and Dan Brock, all the way over in Arizona. Tucson, Arizona. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll catch you on the other side.
And don't forget to get your paint boxes out.
We'll catch you on the other side of some more amazing information.
Right.
Bye for now.
Bye. Right, there we are.